Hello guys, welcome back to our anime explainer. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of Dragon Prince Yuan Season 3 episode number 10 based on novel. So let's start. The result of Zhu Yuan and Cao Shi's match swiftly spread in St. Genesis Peak, undoubtedly stirring up the waters. Many had originally believed this match to be an unimportant squabble that had been started by Zhu Yuan. Even though Zhu Yuan was the champion of the latest peak selection ceremony, it had been a competition only amongst the outer mountain disciples. Cao Shi, on the other hand, was a veteran gold sash disciple, and a formidable individual amongst his fifth-layer Alpha Origin peers. These two were clearly not supposed to be on the same level. As such, many had dismissed the match with a laugh. But who could have expected the final result to turn out in such a manner? What? Zhu Yuan defeated Cao Shi. Lu Yang was with elder Lu Song when she heard the news, disbelief immediately flooding her pretty face, as she immediately asked, "How can it be? Did you make a mistake?" The disciple that had made the report merely smiled bitterly as he explained, "The news has already spread, and so many people have personally seen the battle. Zhu Yuan has indeed beaten Cao Shi." Lu Yang's face turned spicy hot with embarrassment. She had so certain of Zhu Yuan's defeat, hence this outcome was in truth quite shameful for her. He, it seems that you've underestimated Zhu Yuan." Elder Lu Song grinned widely. Lu Yang gently gritted her teeth and snorted. Who knows whether Elder Shen's faction was just putting up a show. Elder Shen may have forced Cao Shi to lose to Zhu Yuan. She was still unable to believe it. Zhu Yuan was only a second-layer Alpha Origin, right? Even if he had defeated the fourth-layer Lu Feng during the peak selection ceremony, there was a huge gap between Lu Feng and Cao Shi. Elder Lu Song shook his head. "I understand old Shen's character. He's inflexible and stubborn, and no matter how highly he regards Zhu Yuan, he will never use such a method to help the latter." The disciple that had come to inform them also said, "It seems that Zhu Yuan's 9 dragons cannon has reached the 8th dragon level." "Oh?" Elder Lu Song, who was currently watering a plant, paused for a moment as he remarked in surprise, "This little guy does have some ability. Even amongst the inner mountain disciples, there are very few who can reach this level in the 9 dragons canon. In his fight with Lu Feng, he had only been at the 4th dragon. I've previously heard of Zhu Yuan's excellent comprehensive ability with regards to Genesis techniques, but I never imagined that it would be so superb." He sighed. Lu Yang pouted when she heard Lu Song continuously praise Zhu Yuan. "If you think so highly of him, why didn't you recruit him?" Elder Lu Song sighed. "At present, Lu Hong's momentum is practically unstoppable, and I no longer have the drive to vie with him, leaving only that stubborn old Shen who is still unwilling to admit defeat. Since that is the case, why should I compete with him over Zhu Yuan? You can take it as me letting him hope. In that 1 in a million chance that Zhu Yuan really does turn out to be an amazing genius blessed by the heavens, and manages to obstruct Lu Hong's faction, it would be good for us too, because as things stand, we'll likely never be able to raise our heads again in the future." Lu Yang's pupils swiveled in thought as she said, "Since Zhu Yuan has defeated Cao Shi, he will become one of the participants for the upcoming cave match. Grandfather, who do you think will end up winning the purple Genesis cave dwelling?" Lu Song chuckled and answered, "Though Zhu Yuan is talented, he has after all only recently joined the inner mountains. It is likely that it took everything he had to defeat Cao Shi this time. If my prediction is not wrong, once he used the 9 dragons cannon, he barely had any Genesis chi left to continue the fight." Upon hearing this, the disciple who had come to report immediately said, "Teacher Shen has incredible foresight. It is indeed true that Zhu Yuan exhausted nearly all of his Genesis chi after using the 9 dragons cannon. I'm of the opinion that if Cao Shi had gritted his teeth and took it, the one who lost would not have been him." Lu Song nodded in agreement. "He's after all a second-layer Alpha Origin, making his cultivation lacking, so even if he replaces Cao Shi, he would not be of much help to Elder Shen's side. I've heard that Lu Hong is sending Wei Yuxian, Feng Yu and Chen Ying. These 3 are certainly elites amongst his gold sash disciples, each one boasting incredible strength, and may even be concealing their true power. That's why even with Zhu Yuan's sudden addition, Lu Hong's side still has a better chance of victory. In such a situation, a mere Zhu Yuan changes nothing." Only after hearing Lu Song speak such words, did Lu Yang finally nod in satisfaction. Lu Song could not help but laugh when he saw this. "He has never provoked or offended you. Why do you always seem so happy when things aren't going well for him?" Lu Yang was taken aback. With a tremble of a full bosom, she self-righteously said, "Well, no one asked him to be the champion of the peak selection ceremony." Lu Song helplessly shook his head. How could he not be aware of his granddaughter's worship of the head of the 10 great chosens, Chu Qing? The same Chu Qing that was also once a champion of the peak selection ceremony. In Lu Yang's heart, no other champion could compare to Chu Qing. Hence, for the sake of proving that she was not wrong, she would naturally adopt such an attitude towards Zhu Yuan. Lu Song glanced at Lu Yang and said, "You'd better not underestimate Zhu Yuan. No one can say for certain how the future will turn out. There may even come a day when he catches up to Chu Qing." He was definitely not happy about his granddaughter's blind adoration of Chu Qing. Hence, he was abnormally critical with regards to Chu Qing. However, upon hearing this, Lu Yang disdainfully said, "Who knows how many geniuses there are who hope to catch up to Chu Qing. I'm afraid that Zhu Yuan will not be able to live up to such high expectations. Grandfather, it is impossible for that to happen. Moreover, it'd be better for him to think about how to handle the upcoming cave match. He'd better not let the chance he worked so hard for end up being humiliation fiesta. The cave match will be nothing like the match between those under the same teacher. If he loses, the entire Zhongshuan sect will know. That's pretty much going to be akin to losing all face. As for catching up to senior brother Chu Qing." Lu Yang stealthily shifted to the entrance, before making a funny face at Lu Song. She slipped away in an instant, her voice echoing from afar as her figure disappeared into the distance. "Grandfather, you can keep daydreaming." Lu Song blew at this beard in anger. Ill-mannered lass. The outcome of the match also eventually made its way to Lu Hong's faction. In a certain stone pavilion, Wei Yuxian was pouring tea, Feng Yu, Cheng Ying and several other Lu Hong disciples seated beside him. Cheng Ying remarked, "Elder Shen's group is becoming more and more pathetic. I can't believe that a new disciple managed to beat a veteran gold sash disciple. This Cao Shi is really too incompetent." The more cautious Feng Yu slowly said, "The fact that Zhu Yuan was able to defeat him likely means that he does have some ability." Cheng Ying laughed and said, "What ability can he have? I already know how the match went. He basically threw everything into that one attack, leaving him no way out. Zhu Yuan does have some talent in Genesis techniques, managing to reach the 8th dragon level during his secluded cultivation, and just barely defeating Cao Shi. However, once it is used, Zhu Yuan's Genesis Qi will be fully spent, making it impossible for him to continue. Overall, he's like a one-trick pony." Feng Yu gave a slight nod. "If that is the case, there is nothing to fear. As long as that move is blocked, Zhu Yuan would become useless." His gaze turned, looking towards the Wei Yuxian, who was still pouring tea, as he smiled and asked, "What are senior brother Wei's thoughts?" Wei Yuxian toyed with the cup in his hand. A faint smile was revealed on his face. "No matter what games they're playing, they will not have any chances in the upcoming cave match, because I've long had my eye on that purple Genesis cave dwelling." Though his voice was soft, there was a certain unshakable feeling to his words, as if they had already decided who the purple Qi cave dwelling would ultimately belong to. However, neither Feng Yu nor Cheng Ying raised any objections. Instead, gloating smiles appeared on their faces. "Looks like senior brother Wei is serious. *I**fine. Senior brother Wei should take the purple Genesis cave dwelling and quickly get promoted. We've been drooling over the gold sash first seat for a long time." The two raised their cups and grinned. "Let's toast to senior brother Wei's success." Wei Yuxian smiled slightly as their cups hit, before raising his head, his eyes narrowing slightly as he peered into the distance. "Tong Long, Pan Song, Zhu Yuan." He shook his head as he chuckled softly. "Are just 3 pieces of trash." Several days quickly passed after the duel between Zhu Yuan and Cao Shi, while the ripples it caused gradually vanishing. After their initial shock, many disciples began to accept the result. The match was after all between those of the same faction, and did not have much to do with the other two groups. The main takeaway of those that had watched the match was that although Zhu Yuan had won, it had been a narrow victory due to his lack of Genesis Qi. Therefore, most people felt they were about equal in strength. As such, the disciples under Lu Hong basically did not care that Zhu Yuan had replaced Cao Shi as the third participant in the cave match. From what they could see, the ultimate result would not be any different regardless of whether it was Zhu Yuan or Cao Shi. It was obvious that Lu Hong's faction did not really view Elder Shen's faction as a threat. In their eyes, the only difference there would be after Zhu Yuan replaced Cao Shi was who would end up being humiliated. Hence, the attention on Zhu Yuan only lasted for a few days before fading away, no one bothering to take any further notice of him. They knew that halo currently over Zhu Yuan would naturally dissipate during the cave match. Yet another morning lesson in the Dao Seeker Hall. Zhu Yuan was seated on the mat with his eyes lightly shut, his spirit borrowing the powers of the Alpha Origin Cliff and Timeless Mat to collect Alpha Origin Qi. In the large hall, other disciples would look over from time to time. However, there was no longer anyone who dared to object to Zhu Yuan's status as the gold sash third seat. Even Kaosha, who was right behind, had practically surrendered for the past few days, no longer daring to casually provoke the former. Zhu Yuan had clearly succeeded in establishing his position through the duel with Kaosha. The hall was silent for a long time. Only after everyone completed their cultivation session did hushed whispers begin to spread. At the highest seat, Shantai Yuan cast his gaze downwards, sweeping past Tong Long, Pan Song and Zhu Yuan as he slowly said, "There are still 12 days till the cave match." Every gaze in the hall immediately converged towards the trio. "Are you three confident?" Upon hearing Shantai Yuan's question, Tong Long and Pan Song hesitated somewhat, not knowing how to reply. After all, they knew all three individuals from Lu Hong's side were not simple at all, especially Wei Yuxian. They had never fought before, who knew what were their chances? "Teacher Shan, we will give our all in battle," said Tong Long in the end, but anyone could hear the uncertainty in his voice. Shantai Yuan frowned, somewhat unsatisfied by this answer. However, he understood that Tong Long and Pan Song were facing a tremendous amount of pressure. After all, the disciples under Lu Hong were indeed of higher quality than them. Even more disciples secretly shook their heads and sighed inside. The truth was that even they did not fancy the chances of their team. As for Zhu Yuan, nobody paid much attention to him. Although he had defeated Kaosha, the latter was slightly weaker than Tong Long and Pan Song. Since the two of them had already declared their views, everyone believed that Zhu Yuan would only be tagging along. However, it was not because anyone looked down on him, but because it would be the same even if it was Kaosha. "If the three of you have any problems or needs in your cultivation, you may feel free to find me directly," offered Shantai Yuan. At such a time, he could only give them as much convenience as possible, and hope that they would succeed in raising their strength. A slight look of joy was revealed on Kaosha and Pan Song's faces, as they hurriedly acknowledged in a respectful manner. In contrast, Zhu Yuan fell into thought for a moment, before attempted to probe, "Teacher Shan, I've recently been thinking about trying to practice the Heavenly Sun God record awarded to me by Sectmaster, but am unable to gather some of the required Genesis resources." 3 Genesis resources were needed to learn the Heavenly Sun God record: the 9-Yarn Crystal, the Heavenly Flame Rock Essence and the Golden Crow Heart. All 3 were quite rare, and he had been searching the Glittering Jewels Pavilion for some time, but to no avail. Since Shantai Yuan had offered his help, Zhu Yuan decided there was no need to be courteous, and immediately struck while the iron was hot. Before Shantai Yuan could respond, Zhong Yang smiled faintly and said, "Isn't junior brother Zhu Yuan being too ambitious? The Heavenly Sun God record is a low-grade Heaven Genesis technique, and let alone Gold Sash disciples, even a few Purple Sash disciples rarely succeed in learning one. In my opinion, junior brother Zhu Yuan should put your efforts into your Genesis Qi cultivation. The opponents you meet in the cave match are no ordinary individuals after all. If your opponent ends up withstanding your 8 dragons 9 dragons cannon, you will no longer have any energy to retaliate." Other disciples also broke out into whispers, somewhat in agreement with Zhong Yang's words. They clearly understood just how stringent a Heaven Genesis technique was, and since Zhu Yuan was already somewhat lacking in Genesis Qi to use the 9 dragons cannon, he would likely be unable to activate the Heavenly Sun God record even if he did manage to learn it, right? This also made them suspect that Zhu Yuan was taking the opportunity to profit from Teacher Shan's offer. Of course, it was mainly because they were quite jealous. It was a Heaven Genesis technique, and even a low-grade one was something several Purple Sash disciples did not possess. Zhu Yuan merely glanced at Zhong Yang, paying no heed to the latter's words as he looked towards Shantai Yuan. The Heavenly Sun God record her. Shantai Yuan was slightly taken aback. He had heard of this technique, and thus knew about the Genesis resources it required. As he stroked his beard, he said, "You do know how to find opportunities, even I will have trouble with these 3 Genesis resources." He looked towards Zhu Yuan and asked, "Are you confident in learning the Heavenly Sun God record?" Zhu Yuan calmly answered, "I will give it my all." Zhongyang laughed upon hearing this and was just about to speak up again. However, Shen Taiyuan waved his hand, gazing deeply at Zhu Yuan as he said, "Since that is so, I will naturally give you my full support. I will help you collect these Genesis resources." The corners of Zhongyang's mouth twitched. He had not expected Shen Taiyuan to agree to Zhu Yuan's rather outrageous request. Ordinary disciples, and even purple sash disciples like them, were not given such treatment all the time. Feeling rather oppressed inside, Zhongyang could only glance at Zhu Yuan with a forced superficial smile as he said, "Junior brother Zhu Yuan, please do not let teacher Shen down. I hope that we will be able to open our eyes during the cave match, and show all of us fellow brother disciples the Heaven Genesis technique you've mastered. Don't waste the cultivation resources you're given." Some of the disciples that were closer to Zhongyang sniggered inside. He was clearly putting Zhu Yuan on a pedestal. If the latter was unable to show them anything during the cave match, the other disciples would likely think that he was purely taking advantage, which would in turn lower his reputation. "Don't worry, senior brother Zhongyang. I will do my best." Zhu Yuan's tone was neither angry nor cold. At the sight of Zhu Yuan's seemingly untouchable appearance, Zhongyang could only coldly snort inside. Shen Taiyuan looked towards Zhu Yuan and suddenly raised his hand. 2 bundles of lights descended, which were received by Zhu Yuan. The bundles of light turned out to be 2 tokens, on which a giant coiling dragon had been carved. On the dragon's body was an unbroken mountain range dotted with caves. "This is..." Zhu Yuan was puzzled. Shen Taiyuan explained, "This is your reward for the peak selection ceremony, a slot for the Genesis Marrow baptism." "Oh? The Genesis Marrow baptism is open." Zhu Yuan was overjoyed. He had been looking forward to it for quite some time. Shen Taiyuan nodded. "It will formally open tomorrow. The second token is for Zhu Xiaoyan, and is given by Peak Master Whitebrow. If she is interested, she may also follow tomorrow." Yao Yao was a toothache for Shen Taiyuan. Ever since she came to St. Genesis Peak, she had yet to attend even a single morning lesson. As such, he had not seen her since. Zhu Yuan sighed inside. Peak Master Whitebrow truly valued Yao Yao a lot. Only the purple sash of the various peaks have the right to enjoy the Genesis Marrow baptism once every 2 months, making it a grand event of sorts. "Tomorrow, you will follow Zhu Tai and the rest there," said Shen Taiyuan. Zhu Yuan looked towards Zhu Tai, who responded with a warm smile. In turn, Zhu Yuan nodded. After giving a few more instructions, Shen Taiyuan waved his hand, indicating for the disciples to disperse. Zhu Yuan grasped the tokens in his hands as curiosity and anticipation flooded out in his eyes. He had been looking forward to this Genesis Marrow baptism for a long time, and it was finally here at last. His duel with Cao Shi had likewise made him feel that his Genesis Qi cultivation was lacking. Therefore, he had high hopes for the famous Zhongshuan sect Genesis Marrow baptism. As he kept the 2 tokens, he mumbled to himself, "I hope that the Genesis Marrow baptism will not disappoint." The next day, when Zhu Yuan brought Yao Yao to the gathering point, he saw that Zhu Tai, Zhongyang and the other few purple sash disciples were already waiting there. With the exception of Zhu Tai, the other purple sash disciples wore nonchalant expressions that gave off a slight air of superiority. They were after all purple sash disciples, status that far surpassed a gold sash disciple like Zhu Yuan. However, although they were pretty much impassive towards Zhu Yuan, the expressions in their eyes began to warm a little when they saw Yao Yao. They discreetly straightened their clothes and posture, as they revealed handsome and friendly smiles to her. Ever since Yao Yao had shown herself on the first day, when the new disciples selected which elder to join, her name had already spread to the entire St. Genesis Peak. She was also immediately crowned the number beauty of St. Genesis Peak. After all, regardless of whether it was appearance or presence, Yao Yao belonged to the category of being peerless in her generation. Even someone as pretty as Lu Yang would appear extremely dull when put next to Yao Yao. Hence, Yao Yao's arrival stirred up certain thoughts in the numerous males of St. Genesis Peak. However, their hearts were shattered when they discovered that Yao Yao was staying in Zhu Yuan's cave dwelling, barely ever stepping out. No one could even catch a glimpse of her normally, making the male disciples with certain intentions grieve and lament. Thus, when the purple sash disciples saw Yao Yao finally make an appearance, all of them suddenly became warm and friendly. If not because there was a chance that Yao Yao would appear with Zhu Yuan, none of them would have bothered waiting here for so long. Today, Yao Yao was dressed in deep black clothes, her fine black hair tied up simply, handing down to her slim as a willow waist, swaying gently as a breeze blew past. Her beautiful and graceful appearance made one unable to resist taking another look. In terms of appearance and presence, Yao Yao was at the level that could bring about calamities. Zhu Yuan had seen quite a number of beauties over the years, but with regards to appearance, it was extremely rare to find anyone who could match Yao Yao. It was as if her beauty had been sculptured by nature, not a single blemish to be found. In fact, anyone would be easily lost in her perfect face. There were times when Zhu Yuan imagined what would happen if Yao Yao had the same bewitching aura as would Xiao Qingyu. It was likely that there would be no man in this world who could resist her, right? Yao Yao elegantly stood beside Zhu Yuan, her gorgeous fair as snow face impassive in response to the warm and handsome smiles from the purple sash disciples, and not even the tiniest ripple could be seen in her clear, distant eyes. She watched the clouds float by in the sky as she carried Tunton in her arms, ignoring the existence of everyone else. Zhu Tai smiled at Zhu Yuan and said, "Since you guys are here, let's prepare to make a move." Zhu Yuan responded with a smile and a nod. Zhu Tai waved his sleeve as Genesis Chi surged out, transforming into a Genesis Chi cloud that brought the group into the sky, and began flying in a certain direction. While they were flying past St. Genesis Peak, another 2 Genesis Chi clouds rose from the other 2 peaks. Atop the 2 clouds were the purple sash disciples from the other 2 factions. Lu Song's faction was led by Lu Yang. With her hot body, she was also quite an attention-grabbing sight. Although she could not compare to Yao Yao, she was still an enchanting beauty. Her gaze first landed on Yao Yao, before shifting away, as if struck by a mental blow to viciously glare at Zhu Yuan, as if releasing all of the blame on him. With a soft snort, she sped away on her Genesis Chi cloud. Lu Hong's faction was led by Yuan Hong. They had the most purple sash disciples of the 3 groups, and thus gave off a strong and impressive aura. Hence, they audaciously looked towards Elder Shen's group without reservation, several disciples constantly casting their gazes at Yao Yao. Zhu Tai shot an angry glance at them, but did not intend on clashing with them here. With a stomp of his foot, the Genesis Chi cloud sped up, rapidly leaving them behind. Giant peak after peak thrust into the clouds on the vast land, Genesis Chi clouds occasionally zipping past in the sky. The calls and chirps of various birds filled the place, and one would even catch sight of squads of disciples in black flying past high in the sky in orderly formations. They were the enforcement disciples of the inner mountains. The entire place gave off a busy vibe. While they were traveling, Zhu Tai advised Zhu Yuan, "Junior brother Zhu Yuan, the Genesis Marrow baptism opens every 2 months and lasts for 10 days each time. You should take note of the time you have." Zhu Yuan curiously asked, "Senior brother Zhu Tai, what exactly is this Genesis Marrow baptism?" Zhu Tai did not answer, and merely said, "You'll know once we reach our destination." All Zhu Yuan could do was nod his head. An incense stick of Tiam later, the Genesis Chi cloud under their feet finally began to slow. Zhu Yuan raised his head and looked to the front as if sensing something, only for his heart to tremble involuntarily. To their front stood majestic mountains akin to pillars that were supporting the heavens, connecting the sky and land. Between the mountains flowed vast, gigantic rivers. From above, it looked as if an endless jade dragon was twisting and coiling around them. An indescribable aura dashed into the sky, making one feel as if the faint roar of dragon was echoing across the land. Zhu Yuan and the rest landed on one of the mountains. Before the giant mountains and rivers that separate them, the group was as tiny as ants. The Genesis Chi here is so pure. Zhu Yuan suddenly discovered that the Genesis Chi around him was extremely pure, beating even the Genesis Chi in his gold Genesis cave dwelling. The area was blanketed in swirling mists, making it appear rather hazy, mists that would only appear when the Genesis Chi in the area was extremely pure. It's because of the rivers. Zhu Yuan's eyes narrowed when he gazed at the wide rivers that snaked between the giant peaks. He had seen mist continuously rise from the rivers and blend into the air. However, he also felt a peculiar pressure when he gazed at the jade dragon-like rivers, making fear involuntarily bubble up in his heart. It seemed that these rivers were not ordinary at all. This is where the Genesis Marrow baptism is held. Zhu Tai grinned at Zhu Yuan as he pointed to the vast rivers. At this current moment, a seemingly endless stream of Genesis Chi were descending from the sky, landing on the various mountains. Junior brother Zhu Yuan, these rivers are no ordinary rivers. They originate from our Tsangshuan sect's origin dragon vein. Genesis Dragon Vein. Zhu Yuan was taken aback. There is a saying amongst the various empires, the one who obtains the dragon veins will obtain all that is under the heavens. In reality, the dragon vein is made from condensed Genesis Qi, and our Tsangshuan sect possesses one which we call the origin dragon vein, meaning that it is the origin of all dragon veins. The main reason why our sect's Genesis Qi is so rich, and can construct numerous Genesis mountains for our training, is because there is an origin dragon vein below us that provides an endless amount of Genesis Qi. This origin dragon vein is the bedrock on which our Tsangshuan sect is built. Zhu Yuan's heart shook violently, shocked as he gazed at the flowing jade dragon-like rivers before him. No wonder he had felt an indescribable pressure. It turns out that these rivers originated from the Tsangshuan sect's origin dragon vein. Unbelievable. His eyes began to burn with excitement as he mumbled. I'm starting to look more and more forward to the Genesis Marrow baptism. Zhu Yuan and the rest stood on a mountain peak, their gazes directed to the front where the jade dragon-like rivers meandered through giant mountain after mountain, ultimately flowing into a giant lake. There seemed to be no end to this lake, in which also stood several heaven pillar-like mountains. The mountains split the lake into sections, making it seem akin to a maze when covered by the mists. Zhu Tai pointed at the seemingly endless mist-covered lake and said, "This is the Genesis Reservoir, and where the Genesis Marrow baptism will be held. Although it is called a reservoir, it is extremely vast, so calling it a sea won't be an exaggeration." Zhu Yuan's eyes fell upon the so-called Genesis Reservoir, as his expression turned serious. He could feel a certain pressure inside it that made fear rise in one's heart, not daring to enter its waters. He knew that this was likely due to the origin dragon vein. It could be said to be a gathering of Genesis Qi that was born from the land, and naturally possessed a certain natural pressure. He raised his head, and saw the faint outline of an enormous Genesis rune boundary that descended from the sky like a dome, enveloping the entire Genesis Reservoir. This was an important place in the Tsangshuan sect, and was naturally tightly guarded. Countless Genesis Qi clouds were landing in the vicinity of the Genesis Reservoir, clearly the disciples from the other peaks. However, what surprised Zhu Yuan was that the majority were not purple sash disciples. Zhu Tai explained, the Genesis Qi in the vicinity of the Genesis Reservoir is extremely concentrated. Although the other disciples do not have the qualifications to enter, they will benefit substantially from training at the edge of the reservoir. Zhu Yuan smiled and asked, "Senior brother Zhu Tai, it should be time to tell me about the Genesis Marrow baptism, right?" Zhu Tai nodded and pointed towards the Genesis Reservoir. "The most important thing you should take note about the Genesis Marrow baptism is the Dragon Genesis essence. It is a mysterious existence that is born from the condensation of Dragon Qi from the origin Dragon Vein. Dragon Genesis essence. How do I obtain it?" Zhu Yuan was taken aback. Hehe, the Dragon Genesis essence is obviously found in the Genesis Reservoir, but in accordance to the rules, the disciples taking part in the baptism need to rely on their own abilities to find it. The Genesis Reservoir originates from the origin Dragon Vein, and is filled with a peculiar pressure. One needs to constantly circulate one's Genesis Qi to withstand the pressure, making it very taxing search. In addition, the Genesis Reservoir may seem calm on the surface, but it is filled with danger. Due to the overflowing life energy from the origin Dragon Vein, the Dragon Qi that leaks from it turns into various kinds of aquatic creatures that will give you a headache when you encounter them in the reservoir. However, because these aquatic creatures are made from Dragon Qi, if you manage to hunt them, you'll be able to obtain Dragon Genesis essence from their bodies. The bigger the creature, the purer the Dragon Genesis essence. Zhu Tai smiled and said, "Why else do you think the Genesis Reservoir opens for 10 days each time?" It's because everyone spends the majority of the first 9 days searching, while the Genesis Marrow baptism is held on the 10th day. Today can be said to be a grand occasion of our Tsangshuan sect that happens once every 2 months. Practically all of the Purple Sash disciples will be coming to search for Dragon Genesis essence and engage in the Genesis Marrow baptism. It's after all something that only Purple Sash disciples get to enjoy, and no one would easily let this chance slip by. He extended a finger and pointed at the sky above the Genesis Reservoir. Zhu Yuan's gaze followed, and saw an island floating in the air. The island was somewhat similar to an altar, numerous old and simple stone pillars adorning it. That is the baptism altar, and the stone pillars on it are called baptism pillars. On the 10th day, the disciples will head there to borrow the power of the baptism pillars to activate the Dragon Genesis essence, ultimately completing the baptism. Zhu Yuan's gaze filled with interest as he looked at the giant altar in the sky. In addition, the Genesis Marrow baptism is also divided into different ranks. When the Dragon Genesis essence is activated during the baptism, dragon shadows will appear and coil around the body. Hence, the rank of the baptism is based on how many dragon shadows appear. For example, if only one dragon shadow appears, it will be considered a one-dragon baptism, the lowest ranked baptism. The highest is the 9 dragons baptism, where 9 dragon shadows will appear. Naturally, the higher the rank, the greater the benefits. Thus, to obtain a higher ranked baptism, you'll have to work hard to search for Dragon Genesis essence, because the amount you collect will determine the rank of your baptism. Explained Ju Tai. 9 Dragons Baptism. An intense look of interest flitted across Ju Yuan's eyes. Senior brother Ju Tai, what rank do you usually obtain? Ju Tai awkwardly scratched his head. I don't really stand out amongst the purple sash disciples of the Tsangshuan sect, and can't last for too long in the Genesis reservoir, which limits the amount of Dragon Genesis essence I manage to find. All of my past baptisms have only reached the 4 dragons rank. Some of the stronger purple sash disciples are capable of reaching 5 dragons. I've heard that Yuan Hong from Elder Lu Hong's faction has achieved 5 dragons every baptism. If we talk about the 6 dragon rank baptisms, I'm afraid that only the chief disciples of the other 6 peaks are able to reach it. Ju Yuan's gaze flashed. What about the 10 great chosens? Ju Tai could not help but chuckle. Junior brother Ju Yuan's ambition is not small, however. The 10 great chosens do not need to so painstakingly search for Dragon Genesis essence in the reservoir, because the sect will bestow them a small section of the Genesis reservoir for their personal use when they become chosens. They can enter at any time they want, and the Dragon Genesis essence produced inside is much greater than other places. As expected of the 10 great chosens, such treatment. Ju Yuan was momentarily stunned, unable to hold back a sigh moments later. The advantages of the 10 great chosens were truly enviable. To think that they would even be allocated their own personal section of the Genesis reservoir. Compared to the other disciples, they were the ones who received the full support of the sect. However, as the ones who had distinguished themselves from amongst the many disciples, they were indeed deserving of such treatment. Ju Tai also sighed as he nodded. That's why they need not put in much effort into finding Dragon Genesis essence for their baptism, to easily reach the 7 dragons rank. However, if they wish to attain an even higher rank, they would have to personally venture into the depths of the Genesis reservoir to hunt the 1,000 feet long aquatic beasts. Only by taking the Dragon Genesis essence from the bodies of such beasts would their baptism reach the 8 dragons rank. Most of the aquatic creatures in the Genesis reservoir were about 100 feet long. It was said that the larger the beasts' bodies, the purer the Dragon Genesis essence. After one reaches the 7 dragons rank, one would have to go after the 1,000 feet aquatic beasts in order to ascend to greater heights. Ju Yuan fell into thought for a brief moment, before he inquired, how strong are the 1,000 feet aquatic beasts? When Zhong Yang heard this from the side, he laughed softly and said, Junior brother Ju Yuan, there's no need for you to consider such matters. 1,000 feet aquatic beast is an existence that even we can only run from. Over the years, I've only seen one person who has been able to hunt 1,000 feet aquatic beast and enjoy the 8 dragons baptism. Oh, who? Asked Ju Yuan with a slight smile, paying no attention to the thorns in Zhong Yang's words. Zhong Yang slowly answered, who else but the head of the 10 great chosens? Chu Qing. Ju Yuan's eyes trembled slightly. This name was akin to thunder even for a new inner mountain disciple like himself. This senior brother Chu Qing of his had left quite a number of legends in the Tsangshuan sect. As someone who could raise the Genesis Marrow baptism to the 8 dragon rank, it seems that Chu Qing was indeed very capable. Although Ju Yuan had yet to meet these aquatic creatures, 1,000 feet aquatic beast that the other chosens could do nothing about was definitely not going to be easy to deal with. Junior brother Ju Yuan, although you only have one chance for now, you should make sure to properly grasp it. It will be great if you manage to earn a 5 dragons baptism. Consoled Ju Tai. Ju Yuan smiled and nodded in response. While they were talking, a disturbance suddenly began to spread in the area, countless male disciples peering towards the distance with bubbling excitement. Ju Yuan and the rest were also sensed something was going on, and immediately raised their heads in curiosity. They caught sight of a Genesis chi cloud descending from the sky, landing on a mountain far away. Skirts of all colors fluttered on the Genesis chi cloud as sweet and melodious voices spread from it. It had evidently been ferrying many girls. At the very front, a young lady in white gracefully stood. A breeze blew past, making her fine black hair dance in the air, the sun shining down on an absolutely stunning face. Lotus flower patterns extended from the fringes of her skirt. Her features were extremely delicate, endowed with beauty that could cause the downfall of nations. On her clean and fair forehead was a lotus flower rune that gave her a pure and holy look. However, an iciness that kept everyone else 1,000 miles away spread from the girl wearing a white skirt, like an unapproachable goddess of ice. Even so, her radiance was dazzling. Though there were many pretty girls around her, they did not seem to glow as much as they should, appearing dull in comparison. Amazement flitted across Zhu Yuan's eyes when he saw her, because based on appearance and presence, the girl in a white skirt did not lose to Yao Yao by much. Moreover, the two were quite similar, both the cold and distant kind that kept others 1,000 miles away. Zhu Yuan had already guessed her identity. There was only one person in the Tsangshuan sect whose appearance could make so many male disciples go crazy. Who else could it be but the third-ranked Li Qingqian of the 10 Great Chosens? Li Qingqian. I can't believe that she's here too. Atop a certain mountain, Zhu Tai, Zhong Yang and the rest gazed from afar at the stunning and graceful figure standing on another peak, surprise appearing on their faces. Each of the 10 Great Chosens owned a small district in the Genesis Reservoir, and could thus enter any time they wanted, not needing to wait for the reservoir to open every 2 months like everyone else. Therefore, they almost never chose to squeeze in with the others during this period. Hence, Li Qingqian's appearance was pretty unexpected for the group. It is Li Qingqian. Zhu Yuan was also looking at the pretty figure. As a male, he was naturally somewhat curious about the individual said to be the number one beauty of the Tsangshuan sect. From what he could see, she was indeed a wonder of sorts. As such, his head turned to the side to look at Yao Yao's glossy as jade face, as if attempting to do a comparison. However, the moment his gaze shifted, Yao Yao's clear and cold eyes shot over, causing Zhu Yuan to hurriedly withdraw his gaze with a forced smile. But there were still many others who held similar thoughts as Zhu Yuan. Quite a number of the disciples in the vicinity secretly began comparing the two, seemingly trying to find out which of these two gorgeous beauties of the Tsangshuan sect was the prettier one. However, just as the numerous disciples began their work, the sound of rushing wind was once again heard from far away in the sky. A dark green Genesis chi cloud descended from the sky and landed on one of the mountain tops, drawing countless gazes over. The cloud dispersed, revealing a slim figure. It was a young man in black, his black hair scattered over his shoulders. He had a defined, chiseled look, but what stood out the most were his eyes. They were pitch black like ink, akin to a pair of black stones, and appeared rather enigmatic. One could just barely make out the sword-like runes on the black sleeves that gently fluttered as a breeze blew past, as an indescribably sharp and formidable sword chi spread from his body, making it seem as if the cry of a sword was ringing across the area. When he stood there, it felt as if he was not a human, but an unsheathed divine sword. The eyes of countless female disciples began to glow as they passionately gazed at the youth in black. Zhu Yuan's also looked towards the youth in black as his expression turned somewhat serious. Just looking at the latter made him feel a slight stabbing pain in his eyes, because the Genesis chi in the latter's body was just too sharp. In the Tsangshuan sect, only those from Sword Commeth Peak would possess such sharp Genesis chi. Therefore, the identity of the youth in black was already clear as day. Zhu Yuan asked in a low voice, "He is the number 2 of the 10 Great Chosens, Kongxing." Zhu Tai nodded with a similarly serious expression. "That's right. He is Kongxing." In the face of such an individual, even purple sash disciples like them felt an enormous pressure. While they were still in shock due to Kongxing's appearance, another Genesis chi cloud descended from the sky. Atop the cloud was a young man wearing Daoist robes on which countless ancient runes had been inscribed. The runes alternated between glowing and dimming as unique undulations spread. The youth in Daoist robes wore a warm smile on his face, looking like quite the handsome young chap as his clothes fluttered in the breeze. The spirit rune peaks Yi. At the sight of the youth in Daoist robes, bewilderment filled Zhu Tai's expression. "What's going on today? To think that 3 of the 10 Great Chosens have come." The other disciples looked at each other, everyone puzzled. If it was just Li Qingqian, it could still be a coincidence, but when 3 of the Chosens arrived at the same time, this matter was no longer as simple as it appeared. "Ignorant, have none of you heard the news?" While they were confused, a clear voice was suddenly heard from behind. Zhu Tai and the rest turned their heads, and saw Liu Yang walking over with her group. He, does junior sister Liu Yang know? Asked Ju Tai with a chuckle. Liu Yang's gaze swept across the group, before she slowly said, I've heard from my grandfather that traces of 1,000 feet aquatic beast were discovered some time ago in the Genesis Reservoir. Kongsheng, Li Qingchan and Yi Ji should be here because of it. 1,000 feet aquatic beast. Astonishment was revealed on the faces of Ju Tai and the rest. 1,000 feet aquatic beasts usually hid in the deepest depths of the reservoir, making them exceedingly difficult to find. To think that one would reveal itself at such a time. No wonder Kongsheng, Li Qingchan, and Yi Ji had chosen to come. After all, if they managed to hunt that 1,000 feet aquatic beast, they would be able to enjoy an 8 dragons baptism. The other chosens are either in secluded cultivation, or out for missions. If not, there would likely be even more of them present. Liu Yang smiled as she continued, of course, if senior brother Chu Qing came, there would be nothing for the other chosens to do. She was still the same Chu Qing fanatic. Ju Tai chuckled as he looked towards the 3 figures. It seems that the Genesis Marrow baptism will be quite entertaining this time. An 8 dragon baptism is a grand affair after all. Even if we can't enjoy it, it will be a nice eye-opening experience. He looked towards Ju Yuan, finding that the latter was still staring at the 3 figures, and immediately patted his shoulders. Junior brother Ju Yuan need not envy them, the future you may also have a chance to taste that 8 dragon baptism. His words were originally intended to console Ju Yuan, but when Liu Yang heard them, she rolled her eyes and said, in the current Sangshuan sect, only senior brother Chu Qing has the ability to attain an 8 dragon baptism, and even the other chosens have never succeeded. She was implying that since the other chosens were unable to achieve it, what qualifications did he have as a gold sash disciples? Ju Tai felt a little embarrassed. Liu Yang was really blunt when she spoke. However, Ju Yuan paid her no heed, merely smiling at Ju Tai with a nod. While they were conversing, a strange sound suddenly echoed across the area. Next, all of the disciples watched in excitement as the enormous dome of light around the Genesis Reservoir gradually began to turn translucent. Ju Tai excitedly exclaimed, the Genesis Reservoir is opening. He then looked towards Ju Yuan and said, Junior brother Ju Yuan, the reservoir is covered in mist and divided into many parts by the mountains. You'll be on your own when you go searching for Dragon Genesis essence. Ju Yuan smiled and nodded. Under the excited gazes of the numerous disciples, the dome of light in the sky grew fainter and fainter, before ultimately fading away. The instant it did so, endless pure Genesis chi surged out. It was as if the entire land had been cleaned, giving it a fresh new look. Rumble. However, almost no one paid any attention, numerous disciples shooting forward at this moment, Genesis chi turning into clouds under their feet, as they swarmed towards the reservoir within the mist. On their respective mountain tops, Kongsheng, Li Qingchan, and Yi Ji also turned into flashes of light as they flew forth, disappearing in the mist in a few breaths. Let's get going. Ju Tai grinned at Ju Yuan and the rest. In the next instant, they too soared into the sky on their Genesis chi and merged into the swarm of humans. Under the envious gazes of the countless disciples that were not qualified to enter, they charged into the endless Genesis reservoir. This video will end here.